what if America's port symbols of trade and prosperity had silently become battlegrounds in a chemical war? That was the shocking revelation from Houston this week, as federal agents intercepted 300,000 kilograms of Chinese industrial chemicals destined for Mexico's Sinaloa Cartel. It wasn't a back alley sting or border tunnel bust. It happened in plain sight inside commercial containers labeled as industrial cleaning supplies. The operation unfolded at the Port of Houston, one of the busiest gateways in the United States. On an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, dock workers processed shipments from China as usual, yet buried in those containers were enough chemical precursors to manufacture over 190,000 kilograms of methamphetamine street value approaching $570 million. Homeland Security investigators had been tracking these shipments for months, recognizing a pattern too large to dismiss as coincidence. This wasn't smuggling by stealth, it was a calculated exploitation of global trade networks where legitimate commerce became the camouflage of crime. According to a 2025 Reuters briefing, US officials now describe the flow of synthetic drug ingredients as a chemical insurgency, a decentralized threat enabled by industrial supply chains rather than jungle labs. The chemicals labeled as benzyl alcohol and N-methylformamide were legal for industrial use but lethal when diverted to drug manufacturing. Analysts note that the seizure illustrates a new era in narcotics warfare where ports, not plantations, define the front line. As one DEA veteran told The Guardian, this isn't about smuggling cocaine anymore. It's about hijacking global trade itself. The Sinaloa Cartel's strategy has evolved. Instead of farming poppies or coca leaves, it buys chemicals from Chinese factories, ships them through legitimate US ports, and refines them into meth and fentanyl in vast Mexican super labs. Under President Trump's administration, these interdictions have taken on new urgency. Following a January 2025 executive order, cartels like Sinaloa and Jalisco Nueva Generación were designated as foreign terrorist organizations, granting U.S. agencies broader counterterrorism powers. That means what happened in Houston wasn't just a drug bust, it was a counterterror operation under the same legal framework once used against Al-Qaeda or ISIS. But the question haunting investigators is this: if 300,000 kilograms were caught, how much slipped through? The Department of Homeland Security estimates that seizures represent just 10 to 15% of actual traffic. In other words, for every container stopped, 9 more may have reached Mexican ports and cartel-controlled territories. The shift in tactics is unmistakable. America's law enforcement is no longer simply fighting drug crime. It's confronting a transnational industrial network that rivals multinational corporations in logistics sophistication. From factories in Wuhan and Tianjin to super labs in Sinaloa, the supply chain spans 3 nations, leveraging legitimate trade routes and modern data obfuscation to hide illegal intent. A 2025 analysis by Jane's Defense Weekly compared these chemical flows to gray zone warfare operations designed to destabilize without direct military confrontation. And it raises chilling questions. If cartels can weaponize trade, what other hostile actors could follow? Could America's economic arteries become the next theater of hybrid conflict? The seizure in Houston may have stopped one shipment, but it also revealed how vulnerable the world's largest economy remains to infiltration through commerce. Every barrel seized wasn't just a container of chemicals, it was a potential mass casualty weapon aimed at American streets. As the investigation deepens, U.S. intelligence warns that the Sinaloa Cartel's chemical suppliers may have ties to state-protected networks in mainland China, echoing past accusations that Beijing's oversight of precursor exports has been dangerously lax. If verified, this could mark the first time a narcotics terror nexus connects 2 superpowers across the Pacific. The Houston seizure then is not just a law enforcement success, it's a geopolitical warning. The battlefield has shifted from jungles and deserts to shipping manifests and customs databases. The question now is simple but sobering. How many more industrial shipments are already on their way? The Houston seizure pulled back the curtain on a logistics empire operating across 3 nations with a precision that would impress any corporate strategist. This was the Sinaloa Cartel's blueprint for global dominance, a model that turned narcotics into an export industry rivaling legitimate multinationals. The process begins in China, where a network of chemical manufacturers legally produce substances like benzyl alcohol acetone and N-methylformamide. Individually, these compounds have valid industrial applications from plastics and paints to pharmaceuticals, but together they form the backbone of synthetic drug production. According to a 2025 BBC investigation, more than 70% of precursor chemicals used in global methamphetamine and fentanyl production trace back to Chinese exporters, often disguised as shipments shipments of food additives, detergents, or cleaning solvents. Once loaded onto container ships, these chemicals embark on a journey through U.S. ports such as Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Houston. Customs paperwork looks flawless. Digital invoices show nothing suspicious. The containers are then quietly rerouted to Mexico, where cartel super labs in Sinaloa and Durango turn them into high-purity narcotics bound for American cities. The system's genius lies in its integration within legitimate trade flows. Every step mirrors normal commerce. As one defense news analyst wrote earlier this year, the Sinaloa Cartel operates like Amazon with a darker mission, efficient, automated, and data-driven. Mexican authorities estimate that a single mega lab can generate up to 2 tons of meth per week, grossing hundreds of millions of dollars monthly. Homeland Security's data from 2024-2025 shows a disturbing escalation. Seizures of chemical precursors increased 5-fold compared to 2020, yet overdose deaths continued to climb, evidence that enforcement can barely keep pace with production. Experts say that for every container intercepted, as many as 10 pass undetected through ports stretched beyond capacity. But why does this matter beyond the drug trade? Because the cartel's supply chain has become a national security threat, exploiting weaknesses in America's critical infrastructure. The U.S. Maritime Administration warns that 93% of imports flow through private sector terminals, creating inspection blind spots. Those same vulnerabilities could be exploited by hostile actors seeking to smuggle dual-use materials, chemicals that can also serve as precursors for biological or radiological weapons. President Trump's National Security Council has responded by merging counter-narcotics and counterterrorism intelligence into a unified chemical threat fusion center. Under this policy, cartel logistics are analyzed with the same scrutiny as foreign espionage networks. "We're not chasing dealers anymore," one DHS official told Reuters. "We're dismantling a global supply architecture." That architecture isn't just criminal, it's geopolitical. In Beijing, regulators face mounting criticism for lax export controls. DW Deutschland reported in September 2025 that several Chinese suppliers sanctioned by the US still operate under new shell companies, re-exporting the same chemicals through Vietnam and Panama. The Chinese Foreign Ministry insists it enforces strict oversight, but Western officials remain skeptical. Mexico, caught between Washington and the cartels, finds itself under growing pressure. Despite joint task forces, corruption continues to erode enforcement. Mexican journalists documenting chemical shipments have faced intimidation and violence. A senior Mexican security source told Al Jazeera, "It's not just drugs anymore, it's economics. The cartels run logistics hubs that move both legal and illegal goods. They are the shadow economy." The revelation forces Americans to confront a sobering truth: the battlefield has no borders. Every Amazon order, every container ship, every port scan is part of a system vulnerable to manipulation. The seizure in Houston may be a victory, but it also exposes how deeply these networks are embedded in global trade. So as the US strengthens port security and intelligence sharing, a larger question emerges: can any nation truly police the arteries of global commerce when the threat hides within its very lifeblood? When President Donald Trump designated the Sinaloa Cartel as a foreign terrorist organization, FTO, on January 20th, 2025, it marked one of the most consequential legal and strategic shifts in America's war on drugs. The move, which shocked international observers, effectively reclassified cartel activity from organized crime to acts of terrorism, opening the door for intelligence operations, military coordination, and global asset seizures that were previously off limits to law enforcement. Under this new doctrine, operations like the Houston seizure were not handled as standard narcotics interdictions, but as counterterrorism missions. This subtle yet powerful redefinition changed everything from how warrants were issued to how intelligence was shared across agencies. For the first time, the Patriot Act's counterterror provisions could be invoked against cartel logistics, allowing the US to pursue chemical suppliers, financiers, and distributors with the same intensity once reserved for jihadist networks. As Attorney General Jeanine Pirro declared during the Houston press briefing, "This is not just about drugs anymore. It's about defending the homeland from chemical terrorism." Her words echoed a growing sentiment within the Trump administration that synthetic narcotics represent a weapon of mass destruction in slow motion, claiming tens of thousands of lives each year. The numbers justify the urgency. In 2024, over 90,000 Americans died from synthetic drug overdoses, according to the CDC, a death toll greater than the combined casualties of the Korean and Vietnam wars. The fentanyl crisis alone was costing the U.S. economy nearly $1.5 trillion annually when factoring lost productivity, healthcare costs, and policing expenditures. Experts across the Atlantic quickly took notice. A BBC special report in February 2025 called Trump's designation a doctrinal turning point, likening it to the Reagan administration's approach to Cold War insurgencies. Meanwhile, European counter-narcotics units began reviewing whether similar measures could target Balkan or North African trafficking networks. But reclassification also comes with profound implications. By labeling the Sinaloa Cartel a terrorist entity, the US can now apply economic sanctions, freeze global bank accounts, and authorize military-style strikes on cartel infrastructure, whether in Mexico or beyond. The Department of Defense has already confirmed that drone surveillance assets previously used in the Middle East are now being retasked to monitor chemical shipping routes through the Gulf of Mexico and the Panama Canal. Critics, however, warn that the strategy risks militarizing the war on drugs even further, potentially destabilizing Mexico. A Guardian analysis in August 2025 highlighted concerns from Mexican lawmakers that FTO designation could justify cross-border interventions without coordination, reviving memories of past U.S. incursions. Yet American officials counter that the chemical threat transcends borders and demands a forward defense doctrine. According to Defense News, this doctrine treats chemical smuggling as a form of gray zone aggression, a hybrid campaign undermining the US from within. The same AI analytics once used to predict terror financing are now mapping precursor chemical supply chains. Homeland Security's new task forces combine the expertise of the DEA, CIA, and Customs and Border Protection, sharing real-time data to anticipate cartel moves. But there's another layer: the geopolitical signal this sends to China, with Washington explicitly naming Chinese manufacturers as part of the terror-linked supply web. Diplomatic tensions have surged. Beijing denies any complicity, insisting that illegal exports are the work of rogue traders. Yet evidence gathered from Hong Kong and Guangdong firms suggests the existence of a state-tolerated gray market, one that quietly fuels the global meth and fentanyl economy. Former CIA analyst Michael Morrell told DW in September, "This isn't just law enforcement, it's deterrence. The US is telling China, control your supply chains or we will." That shift in tone underscores a larger transformation. America's war on drugs has evolved into chemical counterterrorism, a conflict fought with data drones and diplomacy. Every intercepted barrel at Houston or Long Beach now represents not just a legal victory, but a strategic strike in an undeclared war. And as Trump's administration doubles down, one question looms: how far is the United States willing to go to confront cartels that behave like terrorist states, especially when their supply lines cross the Pacific? The staggering scale of the Houston seizure exposes not just one operation, but an entire hidden economy built on industrial-scale chemistry and global trade manipulation. Federal investigators say the 300,000 kilograms of seized chemicals transported in 1-300 barrels and requiring 24 18-wheelers for secure storage could have produced nearly 190,000 kilograms of methamphetamine worth an estimated $569 million on the street, but that figure only scratches the surface. According to the Drug Enforcement Administration's 2025 report, American authorities have intercepted a total of 1.7 million kilograms of precursor chemicals since 2019. Yet those seizures, officials admit, may represent no more than 10% of what actually enters North America. That means potentially 15 million kilograms of unaccounted for chemicals are still reaching cartel labs annually, enough to flood entire states with meth and fentanyl for years to come. The numbers are as chilling as they are enlightening. Analysts from Jane's Defense Weekly calculate that each kilogram of methamphetamine generates about $3,000 in profit-yielding annual revenues for the Sinaloa Cartel, exceeding $60 billion, roughly the GDP of a small country. The illicit chemical trade, once considered peripheral, has now become the cartel's economic engine, powering everything from weapons purchases to political bribery. This industrial scale has forced the US government to adopt data-driven interdiction, transforming the very concept of enforcement. Using AI-powered analytics, Homeland Security and the DEA now cross-reference shipping, manifest supplier data and digital payment trails to predict suspicious cargo before it reaches port. Every container is a data point, said DHS Field Director Judd Murdoch. The difference between a fertilizer shipment and a chemical weapon is sometimes just intent and paperwork. The Port of Houston has since become a test case for predictive maritime policing. Working with private logistics firms, agents have deployed automated X-ray and spectral scanning systems capable of analyzing cargo chemistry in seconds. These technologies, funded under President Trump's Homeland Forward initiative, allow for real-time alerts when chemical signatures match known drug precursors. Still, the logistics challenge is overwhelming. With more than 11 million containers entering US ports each month, even advanced analytics can only screen a fraction. Reuters reported in September that the average inspection rate remains under 3%, a figure that cartels exploit with near-scientific precision. Beyond the raw quantities, the human cost is catastrophic. The CDC recorded over 100,000 overdose deaths in 2024, 80% linked to synthetic drugs. Experts warn that if current chemical inflows continue unchecked, that number could climb to 150,000 annually by 2026. We are facing a national mass poisoning, said Dr. Elena Shaw of Johns Hopkins University. These aren't recreational overdoses, they're chemical casualties of a global supply chain war. Yet amid the despair, the Houston bust offers a rare glimpse of success. Agents note that by seizing just one shipment, they may have prevented 150 million potential doses of meth from reaching American streets. Every barrel confiscated represents thousands of lives, not lost families, not destroyed communities, not hollowed out by addiction. Still, for every success, there's a grim reminder: cartels are scaling faster than governments can adapt. In March, 44 Zyron kilograms were seized in Houston. In May, 50,000 more at Long Beach. By September, the figure jumped sixfold. Al Jazeera quoted one senior U.S. intelligence official calling it a logistical arms race, with cartels refining their supply lines as quickly as Washington upgrades its defenses. And as the scale of seizures grows, so too does the geopolitical complexity. U.S. diplomats have begun pressuring Beijing through new chemical export sanctions, while intelligence reports suggest Chinese manufacturers are shifting production to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos to evade scrutiny. Meanwhile, in Mexico, cartel chemists are experimenting with synthetic analogs that skirt current bans altogether, creating substances even more potent than fentanyl. It's a battle of innovation and escalation, one fought not on city streets, but through customs terminals, encrypted trade systems, and industrial supply routes. And as America tightens the net, the world wonders, can technology truly outpace the ingenuity of those who profit from chaos? As the U.S. grapples with the scale of the chemical onslaught, a new strategy has begun reshaping the battlefield, a doctrine of forward defense aimed at intercepting threats long before they reach American soil. The Houston operation was not a coincidence. It was the product of a multinational intelligence network, a quiet alliance linking Washington, Panama City, and Mexico City in one of the most sophisticated anti-cartel efforts of the modern era. The turning point came when Homeland Security's Chemical Threat Intelligence Division partnered with the Panamanian Maritime Authority, recognizing that many Chinese-origin containers transited through Central American ports before heading north. U.S. officials helped build a regional staging hub in Panama to screen suspect cargo. Every container flagged by American AI systems could now be intercepted on the high seas before it reached Houston, Long Beach, or Miami. The effect was immediate. According to a September 2025 Reuters investigation, more than 600 tons of suspect cargo were detained in Panama in just 6 months. The seized shipments included mislabeled industrial lubricants, paint thinners, and fertilizer additives, all chemical disguises masking precursor ingredients for meth and fentanyl. American analysts describe this as a preemptive firewall against chemical smuggling. Ports once viewed as vulnerable are being transformed into data-driven fortresses. Every scanned barrel generates metadata. Every inspection feeds a predictive algorithm that learns to spot anomalies and address mismatch here or repeat exporter there. It's a war of algorithms as much as agents. A Homeland Security official told DW, "We're no longer just chasing criminals. We're profiling entire supply chains." This network doesn't stop at Panama. Cooperation now extends to Costa Rica, Colombia, and the Dominican Republic, nations positioned along the key maritime corridors cartels once dominated. With Washington's backing, these governments have deployed drone-based port surveillance and AI-powered customs analytics. In September, Colombian forces seized 32 barrels of precursor chemicals based on American intelligence, proof that the model works. But the success of forward defense has also exposed uncomfortable truths about America's dependency on foreign manufacturing. Roughly 80% of global chemical precursors still originate from Asia, a reality that no amount of interdiction can immediately change. The Guardian's economic desk noted that the line between supply chain and security chain has vanished. The same shipping networks that deliver essential goods are now being exploited for synthetic warfare. Meanwhile, U.S. ports like Houston, Long Beach, and New Orleans are evolving into hybrid zones of commerce and counterterrorism. Customs officials now work alongside intelligence analysts, Navy cyber teams, and chemical warfare specialists. Every port is now an outpost, says retired Admiral James Stavridis. What we're seeing is a maritime version of NORAD, except this time it's not missiles, it's molecules. Even private industry is being drawn into the fight. Major logistics firms pressured under Trump's Safe Commerce Act of 2025 are now legally required to install AI screening systems capable of identifying high-risk cargo patterns. Companies like Maersk and Costco have begun sharing anonymized manifest data with DHS to flag anomalies in real time, a dramatic shift in how corporate transparency intersects with national defense. The results speak for themselves. Since March 2025, overall chemical seizures have tripled. The flow of meth-related overdoses in border states has dropped 12%, the first decline in 5 years. While that may seem modest, experts view it as an early victory in a long war of attrition. This is what forward defense looks like, explains RAND analyst Dr. Stephen Harper. We're fighting the battle upstream at the source before it turns into another epidemic downstream. Yet the deeper question remains unresolved. Can enforcement truly outpace adaptation? Each time U.S. agents plug one gap, cartels find another routing shipments through new ports, repackaging chemicals, creating fresh aliases for exporters. The war is as much psychological as logistical, an endless chess match between commerce and crime. As Panama's foreign minister remarked to Al Jazeera, this is the new front line of globalization. We're learning that in the 21st century, you can't separate trade security from national security. The American strategy is clear, but will it be enough to contain a threat that now spans oceans, economies, and algorithms? The battle lines are no longer drawn between armies, but between supply chains, where every shipment manifest and barcode represents a potential weapon in a war of chemistry. The seizure at the port of Houston, 300,000 kilograms of Chinese precursor chemicals, signaled not the end of a campaign, but the dawn of a new phase, a chemical war fought through logistics, data, and diplomacy. As the United States celebrates its victory, intelligence analysts warn that this operation marks only the first round in a much larger conflict. The Sinaloa Cartel, far from defeated, is already adapting. Satellite imagery analyzed by Jane's Intelligence Review shows new chemical warehouses appearing across northern Mexico, many strategically located near rail corridors leading to Pacific ports. These sites are shielded by legitimate import-export firms, giving traffickers a legal facade that even AI detection struggles to penetrate. Meanwhile, U.S. officials believe Chinese suppliers are diversifying their networks using smaller ghost companies across Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam to reroute chemicals through Southeast Asia, effectively creating a shadow Silk Road for narcotics. Beijing publicly denies involvement, but Western intelligence reports corroborated by DW and Reuters suggest Chinese state-linked firms have quietly resisted cooperation with American investigators. They're playing a double game, said Dr. Lisa Chen, a supply chain expert at the University of Cambridge. Officially, they condemn the drug trade. Unofficially, they benefit from the leverage it creates. This geopolitical tension underscores a grim reality. America's war on synthetic drugs has evolved into a contest of systems, Western transparency versus authoritarian opacity, enforcement versus evasion. The Guardian recently described it as a slow-motion arms race between democratic accountability and state-enabled criminality. Within the US, the consequences are already visible. Overdose rates in some states have begun to plateau thanks to coordinated interdiction efforts, but the societal scars remain deep. Lawmakers are now debating a National Chemical Security Act, granting federal agencies wartime powers over chemical imports, while the Department of Defense is expanding Operation Steel Veil, a cyber intelligence mission designed to map every chemical exporter tied to transnational organized crime. This new doctrine, crafted under President Trump and Secretary of Homeland Security Marco Rubio, treats the flow of chemicals with the same urgency once reserved for nuclear proliferation. The language is stark, but deliberate chemical terrorism, industrial warfare, hybrid aggression. It reflects a recognition that narcotics are no longer just a social crisis, they are a weaponized global enterprise. At the same time, the ripple effects across Latin America are profound. Mexico's border regions are witnessing a militarization unseen since the 2010s. With Trump authorizing joint aerial surveillance patrols and naval interdictions in coordination with Mexican forces. Colombia and Panama have agreed to host chemical monitoring stations, while even European nations concerned about the spread of synthetic opioids are sharing satellite data and forensic intelligence. Western analysts caution, however, that brute enforcement will not suffice. This war will be won as much by economics as by policing, said RAND's Dr. Stephen Harper in a BBC World interview. If America wants to stop the flow, it must cut off the demand, and that means confronting domestic addiction with the same vigor used against foreign suppliers. The stakes extend far beyond narcotics. The same networks that move chemicals today could tomorrow traffic dual-use materials for biological or cyber warfare. In that sense, the Port of Houston seizure may be remembered not merely as a law enforcement milestone, but as a national security awakening. As U.S. drones patrol the Gulf, AI scans manifest from Singapore to San Diego, and customs agents monitor cargo round the clock, one haunting question remains, one that policymakers and citizens alike must now confront. If this was the biggest cartel chemical bust in U.S. history, how many others are still hiding in plain sight? The Houston chemical seizure marked a turning point in America's fight against narcotics, a moment when law enforcement crossed into counterterrorism and drug trafficking was redefined as chemical warfare. Under President Trump's administration, the designation of cartels as foreign terrorist organizations gave Washington new powers to dismantle supply chains from China to Mexico. Yet the operation's success revealed deeper vulnerabilities. U.S. ports overwhelmed by trade, global manufacturing dominated by Asia, and cartels operating like corporations with industrial logistics. Through AI-driven forward defense, America and its allies have built a predictive network intercepting threats before they reach domestic shores. But this is no final victory. The Sinaloa Cartel continues to evolve, Chinese exporters find new loopholes, and addiction still devastates communities. The war has become global, systemic, and perpetual, one fought not with bombs, but with barrels, data, and law. The question facing the United States now is not whether it can stop the next shipment, but whether it can ever end a war against an enemy embedded within the same systems that power the global economy. Will America's new chemical doctrine protect its people, or expose just how fragile the modern world has become?